Everybody to Broadcast Team Alpha, where we bring you cutting edge conversation while exploring the quantum possibilities. And we're going to do it again tonight with some really interesting conversation. But as always, I just want to thank you for being here. Thank you for the great chat that happens in the chat room. Thank you for your super chats. Margaret, you sent us a super chat last week and I didn't get to recognize you on the air. Thank you so much. And you guys know, but if you're new, you can connect with us on broadcastteamalpha.com. You can also join us on Sunday for the Mastermind Connection. What is that? It's a meeting of really interesting and out-of-the-box thinkers. We get together and we talk about what we would like to see changed in the world. It can be personal, it can be global, and we create intentions together the world in a positive, it can be personal way. And then we go into a meditative state and we launch our intentions to the quantum realm where the manifestation begins to take place. And, you know, we've seen a lot of magical things, if you will. A lot of miraculous things happen as a result of doing this. So if you'd like to join us, you can send an email to the THE Mastermind Connection, all one word, at gmail.com. Augie can send you the link. You can join us on Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern. At 3 p.m., we have an open discussion about really cool things too, if you'd like to hang around and do that. And we would love to have you. So Augie, tell us about our very interesting guest tonight.
Yes, it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to step out of the box again and wander off into the wilderness. We have Mary Joyce with us, and she's a writer, she's an editor, a researcher, and a student of the mystical. Just my kind of person. And she's an author, and I guess she's written 4 books. There's more, but they may be out of print since several decades ago. One of these books really caught my eye, and that is the one that you can actually find on Amazon, and that's called Cherokee Little People Were Real. And there is an awful lot of evidence to the fact that there are not just the 5 races that we have been told about by science and everybody else that think they know something. There are more. Some of them only are about a foot tall, maybe 2 to 3 foot tall. And we have the evidence. There is skeletons. There is all kinds of evidence. And we're going to talk about some of these things. And you can also find her and her articles and incredible pictures. And I absolutely recommend for you to go there and just lose yourself for an hour and go through. This website that she has is called skyshipsovercashiers.com. And if you go there, first of all, you're going to have a lot of fun. And for the second, you are going to learn something. That will be an experience and a learning experience. So I'm really glad that I was able to connect up with Mary, and welcome to the show, Mary.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
So welcome. This is going to be so interesting. But Mary, how did all this begin for you? That's one of my favorite questions to ask people. How did it begin?
I was absolutely not. This wasn't something I sought out. I moved to the mountains of Western North Carolina, and I began to hear these legends and stories about Cherokee Little People. And at first, I kind of just blew them off as just, old stories. And there was this wonderful man who was elderly, and he came into where I was working at the time, and he said, no, they are real. Now, this man was a World War II hero. He had been a pastor at a church for over 40 years here in the mountains. He was highly respected. So you weren't going to just blow off what he had to say. And when he was a young man after World War II, he got involved with the construction projects at Western Carolina University, which again is here in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And when they were digging into what was supposed to be virgin soil, they found these little tunnels, and they were all cut into real dense red clay. They were all square cut except for the top. The top was always arched. And so engineers will tell you that that makes the tunnel stronger. And over time, every time they were building something on this campus, they would find these little tunnels. It was like a whole network of them. And obviously I took him seriously, and he connected me with other old timers who had been involved with these construction projects. And if he hadn't made these connections for me, I never would have gotten the story. I mean, there's no way you can go knock on a door and get this out of people. And so I spent quite a few Saturdays around kitchen tables interviewing these old timers. And I'm so glad that I did, because I think all of them have passed away now.
Aw. Wow, what a gift. What a gift that was.
And my whole
Did they-
purpose, when I realized that nobody had saved this information, that's when I decided I better write it, because
Yeah.
nobody else had done it. And I thought, this is just too unique to just let it disappear forever. So my original writing was just like an academic thing for the museums. And then I did more and more research and got more and more photos. And it turned into what I call a real book with lots of photos.
Wonderful.
Did they actually find any artifacts or any tools or clothing or any other thing inside the tunnels?
Would you be happy to hear about a little skeleton? I think that's really conclusive evidence that they were here.
Yeah.
Several people testified to this, and one of them was a bulldoze operator. And when he was, using the bulldozer, he turned up this little skeleton. And for a long time, there was a professor in the science department who kept the skull of this little being on his desk, sort of like a conversation piece. And he just always said, well, it was a child skull from the Indian mound. Well, a high school English teacher came up and picked it up one day and looked at it and said, this is not a child's skull. It has all of its wisdom teeth. And I don't know, you have to be, I think, at least 18, 19, 20, something like that before you even get wisdom teeth. So it clearly was not a child.
Wow.
And one of the old timers, he was a painter, not like the kind that paints walls.
Yeah.
And he saw the little skull when it was dug up at the university. And then he went to do an estimation for the guy who had this little skull sitting on his desk, an estimation for a paint job at his house. And there he saw the rest of the skeleton displayed in the science professor's house. So he got to see the whole thing, actually.
Wow. Fascinating.
So that's pretty good evidence. And there's a whole lot of other evidence around here. For example, we had a huge flood. I wasn't here for this, but in 1940, there was a historic flood of the Tuckasegee River. It was one of those that just washed away everything. And there was this little 5-year-old boy who found this medallion-size face. It had a face on both sides. And it looked like a leprechaun. It had the big nose, it had the pointed ears, it had very strange eyes. And this was washed up in the same area where so many of these little people legends exist. So that's kind of another form of proof. And then we have it's supposed to be the largest, it is the largest petroglyph in North Carolina and one of the largest in the southeast of the country. And it's, I can't remember anymore, maybe 15 feet across and 10 feet this way. And it's covered with symbols and signs. The Cherokee do not know what those mean. So many people think it might be something that was done by the little people who were here before the Cherokee arrived. The Cherokee actually, I don't know how long ago, actually originated in the Great Lakes region. So when they migrated down to the mountains, they found these little gardens, but no people around. And eventually they saw these little people come out from underneath the ground and collect the produce and then take it back down. And they used to call these the moon people because they would come out at night.
Wow.
Many years after I did the initial interviews for this, I got a call from friends of mine who live on another ridge, mountain ridge, not far from where I am. And they had debated for some time whether they wanted to show me this or not. Their game cam that was set out by their road. Now they live at the top of a mountain, single lane gravel road. And they had caught this little person in the woods. One of them thought it was a spirit. The other one thought it might be real, but it was, they caught it in August when it was really hot. And this little figure looks pretty much nude. If he has something on the bottom, it's not real clear. Had straight black hair. The camera caught him from the backside. And the couple, one stood by where the camera was and she told her husband where to keep going down until he was at the same position against a tree as the little person had been. And it was about 3.5 feet tall. So that's what I have consistently heard of the little people throughout the mountains of this part of the world. So
That's amazing.
And I did another thing, because the couple was debating about whether it was real or whether it was spirit. And so what I did was I put it on my computer. I turned up the contrast real high. When you do that, anything that is alive will go into a magenta color. Anything that is a spirit will stay white. So on the website, somewhere back in the archives, I have pictures of ghosts that have been supposedly authenticated. And I turned up the contrast on those. They did not turn magenta, they stayed white. So this was whatever this was, it was a live little creature. But that's the only time that I've ever seen anything like that. I've seen the little footprints in the sand.
Really?
But
Wow.
that's as close as I've come to seeing a little person.
Well, that's interesting. I think, 3.5 foot. There is even some smaller ones, because I remember back in Norway, we have all kinds of stories about the little people living in the hills. They have caverns in there, and the trolls they talk about, they call them trolls. They don't look like trolls, but they just look like little people. And they have clothing and tools, and they have their own world separately from us. And those stories has been around since Viking time.
I've just recently taken on the subject of the really little ones, the ones that are in the 12 to 14 inch height. Just recently started posting some of those on the website. After I saw the research that had been done on a little mummy, it's called the Pedro Man, and it was found out, I think, in Wyoming by some gold miners back in the 30s. And two major institutions, one of them was Harvard and the other was, I think, the American Natural Museum of Science or something very close to that. So they had analyzed this completely, and it was a humanoid, and it was about 65 years old. It had been beaten to death. It had been beaten so hard that you could see its brain exposed. And it had the little pointed ears. And when I saw that, right after that, I get a call from a man who had been in the forest in South Carolina, which is close to where I am. And he and some buddies had been out, they went camping. And the idea was the next morning they were going to get up and go fishing on one of the creeks or rivers. And at some point, this little person popped up on a little mound of dirt. And he described him as looking very much like a gnome, but with a flat hat with a floppy brim. He had dark hair. He didn't have, or brown hair. He did not have a beard. His pants were tucked into his boots. And he talked to them, like greeting them. And the one guy freaked out and was going to go smash him. And his buddy told him, don't. And so the little guy ran away. The crazy human backed up. The little man came back and he was really angry. He gave him the Italian up your sign. And the only thing that made sense out of this was, I guess many years later, this particular man ran into somebody who believed his story, because this other man would go into this same area with some of his buddies to go fishing. And they became friends with this little man. And all the little man wanted was beer. They would give him beer. So when they saw these other two guys show up, he was just trying to greet them and saying, "Hey, I'm here." And he apparently wanted beer because that's what he was used to getting from these other people. So it's kind of a humorous kind of story too.
Yeah.
A drunk little gnome.
Where did they come from? What do you think their origin is?
Oh my goodness. We're going to confuse people because we're talking about two sizes of creatures. I've done
Yes.
the most research on the ones that are about 3 feet tall. And I've done research in North Carolina, Tennessee, and even got a couple good stories when I was out in South Dakota. And one of the ladies out there, late 20s, and her grandfather had been a shaman. Her older brother was a shaman. She had some very natural spiritual gifts. And she opened up with me. And she told me that one time they were taking their grandmother down to the creek. And again, we're out in South Dakota now, to set her up in a chair so she could fish. And then the kids went down further in the creek to swim. The grandmother finally caught a fish, and the fish was getting away. So she's calling to the kids to catch the fish so they won't lose it. And they saw these little footprints going up the side of the creek. Later, the gals, I don't know if his brother, somehow related to her, they went down the creek further and they found this little cave on the side of this creek. And they went in it and they found miniature arrows, a miniature quiver, a miniature drum, and they took them back to show their grandfather. The grandfather said, "You take that back, you take that back." And for 2 days they did. But for 2 days after that, not the Cherokee, but the Sioux people were having their chickens killed and all sorts of little devilish things happening. And at first that sounds really, really horrible. But if you're only 3 feet tall and the big people are taking your stuff, what are you going to do to keep the big people from coming back and bothering you? So I actually was kind of compassionate for them, and
Yeah.
they only acted up for about 2 days. But that was kind of a unique story.
That is unique.
And what happened when I wrote this book, Cherokee Little People Were Real? Suddenly, the Native Americans realized I was taking the subject seriously and I wasn't going to laugh at them. So over time, I periodically have been contacted, or one way or another, contacted with Native Americans who have told me their stories. And the cutest one, the absolute cutest one, was told to me by a young Indian woman in her 20s. She was shy. She would never have talked to me, except we had a mutual friend that we both trusted. And so she told me her stories. And the cutest one was that her family had a, like a little trailer that they kept in the remote part of the reservation, the Cherokee reservation. And they would use it for the restroom and for cooking when the family would get together for picnics. And the kids were all playing hide and seek. Well, she decided to go hide in the shower in the little trailer. And when she pulled back the curtain, there was this little man dressed in jeans. She said he looked like Mowgli from the Jungle Book. He had this great big grin on his face. And he was simply wanting to join in with these kids playing hide and seek. It scared her to death. She went running to her daddy, but she's never forgotten that.
Aww.
Wow.
And the whole, both her grandmother, her uncle, her mother, they've all seen the little people. One of the uncles, an aunt and uncle, live in a very remote part of North Carolina. There are actually more full-blooded Indians in Snowbird, North Carolina than there is on the Cherokee reservation. And her uncle speaks Cherokee. He knows the whole cultural ways. And one time when she was there, he spread some flour out on the floor. And I don't know if he did that in the house or on the porch. I never got that straight. But he spread this flour out and he said, "Wait." And in the morning, there were these little tiny footprints all over the flour.
Wow.
And so that was kind of a different kind of evidence that, yeah, they're real.
I wonder how you get, I mean, I wonder if it's luck, or I wonder if they choose you. I mean, I wonder how you get to really see them, be the person who does get to see them, you know?
I think all the stories I have, the people have at least some Indian in them.
Mm.
And I do hear repeated stories of some of the old Cherokee will put out food for the little people at night. And if they don't, they forget. They say sometimes little pebbles will be thrown on the roof, like to remind them. But I have yet to meet a true white person who has had that kind of interaction with the little people.
Hmm. I kind of have the impression that they are somewhat telepathic. They have a little bit of an idea of who they are dealing with. Is it danger involved, or is it just kind of a friendly meetup?
I agree with you. And I live in what I call a hotspot, because not only have we the little people, but we have Bigfoot and UFOs and giants and all sorts of things that have happened in this area. And the Bigfoot are the same way. They can telepathically tell about people long before the people even know they're close by. And so when I see these stories about people going out to hunt Bigfoot, I go, oh, the chances that you're going to get one are very slim.
Seriously slim.
Yeah. There are other small creatures too that I guess we call them fairies. And that's a very controversial little creature too. And I got pictures of them, and Nori and I on our website even have pictures of those things. And there are, they could be, some of them can be as tall as maybe close to a foot long. And they fly. What do you think there could be a connection, maybe in evolution, where maybe they lost their wings? I'm just theorizing, talking here.
I don't think the little people, like the Cherokee little people, the ones that are like 3 feet tall, I do not think they've evolved from fairies. I really don't. When I've talked to some of the Cherokees, they believe that they themselves, the regular Cherokee, come from the Pleiades, and they hide their creation stories in something they call the Seven Sisters, because the Pleiades is 7 stars. And they believe the little people also come from space. I just think, I don't know what word to use, because it's like we're all human to some degree, but it's like one category of humans are, I don't think they've evolved one from the other. I think they're separate, just like we have, you know.
And the thing also is that we know that there existed really short people on Earth long time ago, because in Antarctica there was a fossil found inside of a stone. The stone broke open, and there was a perfect human skeleton. I think it was 11 and a half inches long, and it was curled up kind of inside of the stone. And it was taken, the scientists, they just scratched their heads on it, and they were taken off to a museum somewhere. I don't know where it went, but it was a very credible picture and an article about this human skeleton, 11 inches long.
It's like a little mummy. It's 14 inches high. A little gnome, about 12 inches high. So there definitely is I gotta have a new word, but it's like there is a species that falls into that category. There's no doubt about it. So as far as I've seen that stone that you're talking about with the little skeleton fossil. There's controversy about that. I've not been able to get to the bottom of it yet, so I haven't posted anything on the website about it, because having the newspaper background, it's like I have to really prove things before I put them on the website, and that's just the way I'm conditioned.
Yeah, I saw it in a science journal, forget which one it was, but it sounded very credible, because there were scientists looking it over, and they couldn't really see anything wrong with it. And I guess there's more investigation probably, but it was a very interesting article.
Yeah, I have learned that it's really important to check things out so many ways. For example, I won't give the specific story, but I found this one story and I was halfway through writing it, but I was still doing research. And I started to investigate the man who was doing the research. He didn't exist. They had taken this picture of somebody else and created this whole identity for him. And somebody had gone to all that trouble to create something that wasn't real. So whenever you're dealing with the topics that, like UFOs and Bigfoot and little people, those kind of things, you really, really have to try very, very hard to make sure somebody isn't just getting their kicks out of fooling people, because there's a lot of people that like to do that.
Yeah, especially these days, when pictures can be faked so easy. That's I've been had so many times that
Well, I think by nature, all three of us are very open to these kind of possibilities. The difference is, after spending a lot of time with newspapers, there's a part of my head that clicks on, and I have to make sure that that part agrees with what I am into. It's really important, because otherwise you do get, you get fooled.
Yeah, there are times when you read things and the so-called bull meter goes off,
And then sometimes it doesn't, and you go and you don't want to get caught on that. You really don't. So if I get some good confirmation on that fossil that you're talking about, I certainly will post it. And if you ever have time, send me what you've got, and I'll see if it substantiates other things.
Okay. How many types of little people? We have the gnomes, and we have on our website on broadcastteamalpha.com, we have a lot of pictures in there of really short people. Must be not 20-30 of them altogether that I have accomplished over the years. And how many types do you think there are in different parts?
I do not know. Many of your listeners or watchers will be familiar with Stephen Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer. And a number of years ago, he was showing this little skeleton that they'd found that was in this small category. It was very different, though. It had a very elongated head. It looked quite different than the other little ones that I've heard about. I don't know. We have so many different dogs in the world. We may have as many little people for all I know.
Yeah.
Or tiny people. What you're talking about are tiny people.
Yeah, I see we are coming up on the bottom of the hour here, so we have a video that we want to show the listeners. But when we come back, you got some pictures also, Mary, that are you able to show some of those?
I don't know how to do that. If you go to our website, you might be able to get what you want people to see. Yes. I can't help you from here. I'm not that technical.
That's okay. I got some that I can show. And for those of you that hang with us here, this is going to blow you away, actually, because the here is recognized, verified, real pictures of little things. So yeah, we're at the bottom of the hour, Mac. Maybe we could run the video, and that's
20 seconds.
Next. Okay. All right. I still think there's some kind of a connection here. Okay. Well, Nari, we are back.
Mm-hmm.
There, I turned my mic back on. There you go.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, it would be kind of fun maybe to show some of those pictures, and or at least one of them, but that really explains in itself. I'm gonna put things away here. I'm gonna share screen, and then I'm gonna take us to the picture gallery of, okay.
My internet is a little unstable. I'm just letting you guys know.
Oh, yeah, you looking good sound from here, so. Yeah, yeah. This picture that I was going to show you first is one that it's a skeleton of a about an 8 centimeter. That's kind of like 3 inches tall. They expect the being to be. It was found in a falcon's nest. So evidently the falcon got a hold of something, that little being, and brought it to the nest, and you can obviously see what happened to it. It must have been quite an experience for the little guy, but there is the skeleton, and I'm going to show you that because it is so clear and so explanatory of its own. You can see the skull and it all. So let me know, Mac, when I can share screen. Okay. All right. I'm gonna share sound and video. So can you all see that? There you go. This was found in a falcon's nest. I see there's a lot of goofy pictures here. This is a human head. And there's a coin next to it. I believe it's a British coin, a 5 pence possibly. Excuse me here. I got stuff everywhere. Okay, there you go. You can see
Fascinating.
part of the rib cage and the spine, and I guess the falcon ate most of it, but that head
Mm.
is humanoid head. There is no question about that.
It looks in proportion to a regular human head.
Yeah. And the
Very
text
interesting.
here, another picture was found in a falcon. It's in Cornwall, England. Yeah. Now, and there is another one that actually I think I'm gonna scoot over to and show you also, because it is pretty good, and the picture itself has a lot of credibility. That's why I want to show it, because it was taken by a university professor in England. Okay, I'm gonna go to page 27. We got 202 pages of pictures here of unbelievable things that shouldn't happen or be, but it is. So let me see. There we go. Here we go. This picture was taken by a university professor, and oh, come on. All right. It's John Hyatt in Manchester, England. He took this picture. If we look really close to it, you can see that it has 2 legs, 2 arms, wings, and a head. At first glance, we can say, these are just bugs. But when you start looking at it, first of all, they were a little too big for bugs. Look at this one. They got long legs, got arms, got wings, and you got a little head. Here, this looks like 2 of them is getting together up there. It's kind of dancing, and it looks like little bitty humanoids with wings on it. Thought that was an interesting picture. And now let me see. Yeah, there's all kinds of other stuff here. You can see, hey, just for the curiosity's sake, this is a crater on the moon with some buildings in the bottom of it. Yeah. Okay, that's it. That's probably, there's others, but it takes a little while to get to them. So I'm just going to stop this for now. I thought it was two very interesting pictures.
Absolutely.
And yeah. And there's a lot of other pictures out there too. And some of them are questionable, you know, especially the really clear ones. They are, you got to question everything, I guess.
You have to. If you want people to take you seriously, you have to be reasonably confident that what you're putting out there is correct.
Oh, what happened to Nori? She disappeared?
Looks that way.
Yep, she did say her internet was sketchy. So anyway, now you mentioned also in one of your articles on your website, there were some moonshiners that had some interesting experience. Of course, that could be kind of interesting anyway.
I already told you that the initial things were being found at the university, Western Carolina University, and south of there, but up a mountain, moonshiners, and I got to meet some of them, had a place hidden way back in the woods. And they found what they called a little pile of bones, little people bones. And I just thought that was really peculiar. But then I found out that the Cherokee, they liked the little people that looked like them. They didn't like the ones that they described as having red whiskers and squinty eyes, and may have looked more like leprechaun type creatures. And they would kill them, which I was kind of horrified at when I heard it. But that might, when you tie that together with the stories of the pile of little bones where they had the still, you begin to wonder, absolutely begin to wonder. And these, apparently there was a very large community around here, because even when they have done construction in Silva, which is a town close to the university, they have found these little tunnels. So they're just a part of this part of the world, and certainly a part of the Cherokee tradition.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the guys that I was contacted by was Cherokee. He was in his 70s, I believe, when he contacted me. And he says as a young man, he and some of his buddies went hunting for bear, and the weather got really, really bad. So they spent the night in a cave. And during the night, one of his buddies woke him up and said, listen. And outside the cave, there were little people talking, but they weren't speaking the Cherokee that these guys knew. The Cherokee men could recognize some of the words, but not all of it. He felt like they were speaking an old ancient form of Cherokee. And the next morning they went out and they found these little tiny footprints outside the cave. I'm guessing that the cave belonged to the little people, and so they probably spent the time outside that night because the big people were inside.
I have some other thoughts that I actually should consider, and that is that maybe that some of them could be interdimensional, because there are stories of people saying, yeah, we saw them when they went around this curve, or they went around this, so we kind of lost sight of them, and then we went and looked around and they were gone, and there really is no place where they could have gone. So, or they could be there and then disappear. What do you think about this, that they could be phasing in and out of the physical existence with us?
I hear the same thing with the Bigfoot stories. It's very, very hard to prove those things. Very, very hard. It's much easier to prove that there is a physical reality to them. And if the Bigfoot can hide out and we seldom ever see them, think how easy it would be for the little people to hide out and not be seen. Um, I just don't know how. I just don't know how you can prove something like that. And if I ever figure it out, I will do something about it. But right now, the way people think, if we can just convince them that these little people are real, we'd be
Yeah.
making great headway. And you teach people by steps. And I didn't start out with the little fairies with this website because that's harder to convince the normal human, Westerner. And
Yeah.
and that's why I was so happy to find concrete evidence of these little people that are 3 feet tall. And there's humor with this. There's one man who he looks totally European, and he is of the Uchi tribe, which may have originated in Europe. But anyhow, he tells some cute stories. And as with all groups of humanoids, the teenagers are the ones that are the most mischievous. And he talked about how on his land, he has about 200 acres, most of it wooded. And the little people will communicate with him because he is part Uchi. And he said one day he was out in the woods and all of a sudden this little person came swinging down like from his knees and swinging down. So he's looking the man right in the face. It was one of these teenage little people who was just, trying to be playful. And it's also the Bigfoot that we're likely to see are often the teenagers too. So thanks to those teenagers, we're seeing more of these creatures than we might otherwise.
Wow. Yeah. I have a really strange story on my own when it comes to that. I used to fly for a living, and there were one time I was going through some really questionable weather. There were thunderstorms everywhere. I was in and out of the clouds. I was probably up around 12, 14,000 feet. And this thing hit the windshield of the aircraft. It kind of splattered and then it slid up the windshield, because of the air pushing it up.
Right.
But I could see it looked like a person. And I looked at that, and it only took probably about 2 seconds from the time it hit down below, and then it was gone up the top. But I followed it up, and it looked like a person, almost like it had clothes, but there was difference in colors on the top and the half.
Wow.
And this thing it left a trail of blood on the windshield. And I'm not so sure I've talked about this to anybody ever, because it is so strange. I mean, how could it be up there at 12, 14,000 feet? That's impossible, unless it got sucked up in a thunderstorm and then brought up, but then unlikely too.
Wow.
But there is unbelievable stuff that can happen sometimes. And I encourage people to look at it and reevaluate to yourself. First of all, we know when we see something, and most of us are not hallucinating. So there's something there. And
that's a really good story. I'm sure it's one you will never forget.
That brings me back to the interdimensional aspect of things, because now I'm going to really go out on a limb here, and I'm going to talk about the fact that, yes, there are several Earths in the same location. All these Earths do not have the same level of surface. Some of them, there's one about 5,000 feet, and there's probably others that has maybe a little bigger circumference, so that the surface will be higher compared to us. Maybe something have slipped out of that existence into ours and ended up. Oh yeah, I know I lost a few of you there, but that's okay. I lost many people over the years, because these are just thoughts that you can think about, because quantum mechanics and the holographic universe provides for these thoughts to be real?
This is kind of related to what you're saying. There is a Bigfoot researcher out on the West Coast. He's a doctor of some kind, and his last name is Johnson. And I did a series of 3 articles about him and his Bigfoot connections. And the very last one was where they were seeing a Bigfoot like disappear into a portal. Like there would be something that opened up and then the Bigfoot disappeared. So he went from not believing to then finding out that they're physically real. And by the time he learned all of this, then I guess he was ready to see this phenomena. So
Yeah.
if that is possible, it's certainly possible for little creatures even more so.
Well, you have run into a lot of testimonials.
How do you mean?
Well, you talk to a lot of people that have
Oh,
seen
yeah.
things and done
Right.
things, and even that one about the Sasquatch walking through that portal. There are other people saying they just disappeared. Where did they go?
Right.
So there has to be some form of, I don't know if I should call it interdimensional, but multi-dimensional possibly.
And
Where
to
they can
complicate this even more, in this area where I am, where we have little people, Bigfoot, and UFOs, there are people who talk about there being a connection with the UFOs and the Bigfoot. So that's another possibility. There's one man who lives not close to where I am, but he's still in North Carolina. And they were cutting down a lot of forests. So the Bigfoot came close to where he lived because the forest was getting chopped down. And he eventually became kind of friendly with them, and they trusted him. And one night he heard them making all sorts of different kinds of sounds, and he grabbed his camera just in case there was something good to catch. And he went out there, and the Bigfoot were along the tree line, all looking up at the sky. And there was this gold UFO, and he did get a picture of it, and we did post it. It was kind of changing form a little bit above where these Bigfoot were, and they were watching it. So I found that really interesting. But to give you an idea of how much the Bigfoot trusted him, they let him see their baby, this couple let them see their new baby, which is just remarkable, just remarkable. And to make it even more unbelievable, this happened on Christmas Eve. So it was like a Christmas Eve baby he got to see. And
Wow.
again, it's an experience that nobody will ever forget.
Wow. That's phenomenal. Yeah. I know there are people that have made friends with Bigfoot. And
Absolutely.
yeah. And
In fact,
they don't. Yeah, go ahead.
okay, the book that I've written called Bigfoot Beyond the Footprints, I focus totally on the human side of them. And by that, I mean, they have families. I'll tell you one story. It came from a man who was had to retire early as a sheriff's deputy. So you can kind of get the idea of the mindset of this man. He got cancer and he moved to a remote part of the mountains here in North Carolina. And his story is longer, but he first heard the sounds. Then he heard splashing in a creek where there's no humans around. And it ended up being a family of 4. He ended up calling the man Fred, and he called it Fred and his family. And it was the couple and like 2 teenagers. The male would come down to his garden when he was gardening, communicated with him telepathically. And this man would share some of his produce from the garden with the Bigfoot. But they typically have families. Usually seems like 2 children seems to be the most that I've ever heard of. But another thing, I don't know if you ever heard of Dr. Melba Ketchum. She did DNA research, a 5-year study on DNA research with the Bigfoot. And her conclusion caused a whole lot of uproar in the scientific community at first, because the female side is human and the father or the maternal side is some unknown species. You can only find that in the nuclear DNA. So, you know, people will get a strand of hair and they'll say, well, it's just human hair. You have to have the root of that hair in order to get the paternal side of the DNA. And that's where you find proof that it is a unique species or blending. And I say that there are distant cousins.
Yeah, very likely.
Very likely. And there's another woman who has had such great contacts that she was, before we had trouble with Russia, was even invited over to Russia by the man in charge of Bigfoot research over there because of her experiences. And she talked about how when you really get to see the Bigfoot, they look different. Some will have light eyes, some will have darker eyes, some will have lighter skin, some will have darker skin. The hair color will vary. So they're not all the same, just like we humans. We don't all have the same eye color. And we see these images of Bigfoot and they always look the same. And she says that is just not accurate. Of course, most of us don't get close enough to distinguish the differences. But by the way, Dr. Melba Ketchum was totally criticized for her research in the beginning. The scientific community said that was hogwash. Since then, a number of other scientists have conducted similar research and discovered the same thing.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's many different types of Bigfoot. You got the Sasquatch and you got the 12-foot tall, the 8-foot tall, and then you have the Himalayan Yeti and the snowman, and many different parts of the world, they look totally different.
Right.
And then in the Eastern Europe, they also talk about this person that looks just like a human, red hair, double row of teeth, 12-foot tall, that the Americans ran into over in Afghanistan, and they ended up killing one and taking it back. And they look just like human. They're just tall.
Boy, we could go on forever, couldn't we?
Yeah.
There's a man, Charles Hall, who some of your listeners may be familiar with, but he has talked about different species of ETs. When he worked out near Area 51, he was interacting with a group that he called the Tall Whites. He also interacted with the Greys. And when he was a young man, he met some that looked very human, but they have the double rows of teeth like you're talking about. And they tend to be in the Scandinavian part of the world. Apparently that's, from the way he tells it, that's where their ships arrived, was in the area that you're originally from.
Yeah.
But the double rows of teeth, and they don't have as many, another one, they don't have as many teeth. And he talked about them having, I think, 24 teeth. And we have 28 or 32, depending on if we have wisdom teeth. Yeah. So, but otherwise they look like us.
Yeah, I remember growing up, we heard about these really big folks out in the wilderness, you know, up in the mountains where there were no people at all. And that's where those people ruled. They were there. They had even small herds of reindeer and things like that. So yeah, there were stories that was passed down from people that has been befriended by them and could actually go meet them. And they usually traded when they did. They brought something that they would want, and then they got something back, and they kind of traded with them. And but then things, you know, then after the 1960s and so on, you know, when technology became more overwhelming, then it kind of drained into sand, and all these stories disappeared because people said, nothing to it. Yeah.
What's interesting is even in history, you can find stories. There's one I include in my book, and somebody was doing research on a family, just the family history from the Civil War. And the man had kept a diary of, or written up his experiences, and it looked very authentic because it was the paper of that time, it was the writing style of that time, it was the ink of that time, everything about it was very credible. And he talked about being severely wounded during the Civil War. And when he came to, there were like two legs there, like he called them like tree trunks. And it ended up being a female Bigfoot. And they had no words for that at that point. They called them the forest people. They picked him up and took him into a cave. They used herbs. They did different things and helped heal him. And then when he was good enough to go, they let him out of the cave. But, and they were very knowledgeable. Like, for example, he was in the back of the cave and he couldn't move. So obviously it became rather smelly back where he was. And the Bigfoot came in with a white powder and spread it over everything, and the smell went away. And it's lye. That's what we still use in camping toilets and things like that.
Yeah.
So they knew about herbs, and they knew about lye for getting rid of the bad smell.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. Yeah, you got several books out there. Talk just a little bit about the books and where they can get a hold of you and where they can get the books and where they can reach you.
The website would have everything you might need to find. And it's called Sky Ships Over Cashiers. Cashiers is spelled just like a cashier at the grocery store. It happens to be the name of a town here in, where we started seeing all the UFOs. So anyhow, the books are Cherokee Little People Were Real, which we talked about. Another one is Bigfoot Beyond the Footprints, which really focuses on the human side of the Bigfoot instead of just portraying them as monsters. There's another one called Underground Bases Hidden in North Carolina Mountains, which is about the secret bases of the military throughout the mountains here. And the last one is called Tangible Evidence of Jesus, Evidence Left Behind for Us to Find. And so they're all quite different topics. They're all available on Amazon. And on the website, on the left-hand side, you can find out how to contact me. Under Editor's Corner, there's also a lot of information about shows I've been on, about quick summaries about the books, things like that. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I encourage everybody, it's so hard for us to expand our minds. I mean, it is hard. There's something that we're conditioned to stay in this box of thinking. And I probably will have to fight that all my life to push those boundaries back. And life is very interesting when you do that.
Yeah.
Which you clearly already know.
You're written on a lot of different subjects there, and even the one tangible evidence of Jesus. A lot of people are running around out there saying, if he was such a central figure back then, how come there isn't anything written about him? Well, there he is, but you may have to step out of the box a little bit to find it. Read some. There are the surviving Roman records, as well as other people at that time. They did write about him, and there is a record. He did exist. So we know that. Yeah. Even the naysayers don't have much.
Yeah, I found that fascinating. I thought more people ought to know about it. But what's interesting is that book probably sells the least, because the people who are real Christians think they already know everything, and so they don't want to read it. And the people who aren't conventional Christians just don't want to hear some more of the Christianity. And this book doesn't fit into the category of either one. It's more of an archaeological presentation of the information. Again, with all of my books, I have lots of photos. I think too many people get bored with just gray pages of type. And so on my website, there are lots of photos to make the information come alive.
That's wonderful, wonderful. Well, gee, we are down to the end here, but this has been a lot of fun. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking with you. You take
Yeah.
care.
Okay, you too.
Uh-huh.